Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Department of Political Science, I take this opportunity to welcome all those of you who have gathered here with us for this academic discussion. We are very fortunate to have amongst us Dr. Ayan Guha, Assistant Professor, Jamia Hamdard University, New Delhi, for the second book talk organized by our department. Dr. Guho is the author of the book, The Curious Trajectory of Caste in West Bengal Politics, chronicling continuity and change, around which our discussions shall be centered today. He widely writes in his area of specialization, which is identity politics in India, especially caste and Dalit mobilization, in critically acclaimed journals such as the Economic and Political Weekly, Contemporary Voice of Dalit, Contemporary South Asia, to name a few. After completing his undergraduate and postgraduate studies from Jadavpur University, Dr. Guha went on to pursue his PhD from Dr. K.R. Narayanan Center for Dalit and Minority Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, from where he was recently awarded his PhD degree. Looking forward to a very fruitful discussion, and I would now like to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor to deliver the inaugural address and flag off the program.
Good afternoon, everybody. Now, it's an interesting program, isn't it, dear students? It's a program on discussion on a book which is going to be released. It's released already? Yeah, it's released already. The first book which has been published by Dr. Ayan Guha. As already you came to know about his background, what he is, and how actually he started. The important thing is that he actually taken a very important area of his, the title of the book is very interesting. I'm not sure about that your generation, whether you understand this properly, because our generation, we understand this thing from a completely different point of view, because we have seen the Bengal for a long period of time. And you are the present generation, you have not seen a lot of things which are really the characteristics of Bengal. Now, the difference in this, I think it's going to be reflected in your, I don't know, I have not read your book, in the trajectory when you said, because there is a trajectory in the whole thing which you want to discuss. Because caste itself, this particular term caste, is normally when we have grown in the city population, it's not really a very strong thing. In the village population, it's there, but it's not prominently actually looked upon in the politics itself. But as the days goes by, and at that time when we used to say, there are a lot of different movies used to come. Sham Benegal used to actually has got a number of movies on which is based on the caste-based politics actually, in the different regions of the western part or in the Bihar, Uttar Pradesh and these particular areas. And we used to actually grew up and said, oh, Bihar, there is no election. It's all actually the caste-based, and it's actually a different way this whole politics is going on. And in Bengal, we call, no, we have more or less have some sort of our own understanding, and it is much better situation. With time, the things are going in such a way so that, I don't know, in if you ask me, I feel like the caste are redefined right now. It is not the caste only, it's caste, religion, everything gets mingled up. And that itself has got a huge amount of impact on the politics itself. And I'm very happy, and I really thank the Department of Political Science for organizing this program. But I must actually thank the faculty members for thinking about such a nice way of coming up the discussion part, which is very important. And I really want to thank Dr. Ayan Guha as well as Shomo, our faculty member from the Department of Political Science, who are going to be in discussion today. I'm sure that this is going to be a very interesting program, and I don't want to waste the time of yours. Thank you. Namaskar.
I would now request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, to kindly felicitate our guest for the day. Sir, please. I would now like to call upon our humble dais, Dr. Ayan Guha and our Professor Shobo Shaha, to please start the conversation and get the ball rolling.
So if you kindly, please join with me here. Please sit. Yeah. I welcome I welcome Professor Ayan Guha for joining us today in the department, and for Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, for being with us here. Thank you so much, sir. So, a few months back, I had reviewed the book, and the review had come out in the mainstream weekly. So I had the humble opportunity of going through it. I had been going through it again for the purpose of this book talk, and there were multiple questions that came into my mind once again. And we today have Professor Ayan Guha with us, and we are really grateful. একটুখানি যদি কমিয়ে দেওয়া যায়। Yeah, we are really grateful that Professor Guha is with us here today for discussing those major questions that I believe will be in many of our minds if we do justice to this book and we read it once. So without wasting any more time, I'll directly move on to the discussion and with my questions. So the first question that I have here with me is that scholars across board like Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, Joya Chatterjee, Rajat Roy and others have worked on the subject of caste politics and caste movements in West Bengal in some form. in that context, what is the subject matter and unique significance of the questions addressed in this book that motivated you to write it?
So the question is about what are the significant research questions the book deals with, and how those research questions are important in the present times. I think that's broadly the question here. So now this book is actually based on a certain political context. The idea of the book, or the idea of this whole study, emerged in my mind after 2011. Now, why 2011? Because 2011, as we all know, that is a watershed movement. It's a watershed moment in the history of West Bengal, in the present history of West Bengal, because the rule of the left came to an end. Now, as you all know, this is the longest serving democratically elected communist government in any part of the world. So therefore, it is a momentous event in the present history of West Bengal, or even in the history of Bengal, if we look Bengal in a broader kind of temporal sense. So, with the decline of the left, or the defeat of the left, led to a lot of rethinking about many of the taken for granted assumptions about the community and politics interface in West Bengal. And in this connection, one of the important questions that scholars started to become more interested in is the role of caste in West Bengal politics. Now, why the role of caste becomes important? Because if you look at West Bengal politics, and if you compare West Bengal politics with other states, you will find that caste has not played much important role in West Bengal politics. If we see politics from a macro perspective, I'm not going into the micro domains of politics, the everyday domains of politics, but if we see politics from a macro perspective, or what we generally call the organized, institutionalized domain of politics. So caste hasn't played an important role the way it has played in other parts of the country, in West Bengal, and political articulation on the basis of caste and political aggregation of interest on the basis of caste hasn't happened in West Bengal. And since the late 1970s, more specifically, caste factor gained prominence in the politics of different states of the country, particularly northern India. But West Bengal, under the rule of the left, remained immune from large-scale caste-based political mobilization. Okay. And why this is the case? So that is basically the first research question this book addresses, that why caste hasn't played an important role. Okay. Why caste hasn't played an important role in West Bengal politics compared to the politics of other parts of the country. So that's the research question this book deals with. And another research question that this book deals with is whether with the decline of the left, caste is going to play a much more prominent role in West Bengal politics. Now, this second research question also has a background. Now, the decline of the left since 2011 also coincided with political mobilization and political assertion of
a particular community, the Mutua Nomoshudro community, which you all know. Okay, so nowadays we talk about the Mutua factor, we talk about the Nomoshudro factor in West Bengal politics, but if you go back a couple of decades back, even a decade back, in the early 2000s or even in 1990s, very few people actually knew about something called Mutua or Nomoshudro. Okay, so with the decline of the left, we are also seeing some sort of assertion by some communities, such as the Nomoshudros or the Matuas. And because of this, some scholars are of the opinion that with the decline of the left, caste is going to play a much more important role in West Bengal politics. So in this context, this book deals with two research questions, that why caste hasn't played an important role so far, and whether with the decline of the left, caste will play a much more prominent role. Okay. So this is the kind of background of the book, this is the context of the book. And the second research question is, of course, a new research question, because this research question is a result or outcome of the decline of the left. And the first research question is not something which is new. That means this question that why caste is not playing an important role in West Bengal politics is something which many scholars have taken interest in, but there has been scattered writings on the issue. There has not been an organized, systematic writing or organized, systematic book length or monograph length study which addresses this particular question. So it is in this context, I think the book tries to contribute to the existing literature, whatever is available on the politics of caste in West Bengal. So that's, I think, is broadly the kind of the question which you have asked. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, actually, Joya Chatterjee's work is more on partition. Okay, so it's her book is basically deals with how partition has resulted in a refugee situation. Actually, two of our very major works. One is The Spoils of Partition. So The Spoils of Partition basically talks about the impact of partition on the social and economic life of the state. And Joya Chatterjee, another book is The Hindu Communalism and Partition, which talks about how not only Muslim communalism, but Hindu communalism also played a role in partition. So those books kind of touch upon this issue of caste, because as we all know, Nomoshudros are a migrant community. They came from East Pakistan and later Bangladesh. So therefore, when we talk about migration, we of course will have to talk about the Nomoshudro question as well. So there is some reference to the Nomoshudro question, but the book is, their hard work is not per se on caste. It's more about partition, the refugee question, and caste comes as a kind of a reference point in that. But if we look at Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's work specifically, the Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's work is focused upon the caste question. His work is on the Nomoshudro movement. And we all know that Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's book on the Nomoshudro movement, that is considered to be the most authoritative work, or possibly the only work on Nomoshudro movement. So that talks about how the Nomoshudro movement has evolved over the years and why it has evolved in a certain way it has evolved. So this is basically, he basically kind of maps the historical evolution of the Nomoshudro movement in his book. And why caste hasn't played an important role in post-colonial West Bengal, the Shekhar Bandyopadhyay says that it is because of the partition, because Nomoshudro movement was a very vibrant movement, and it challenged the hegemony of the upper caste in the colonial Bengal. But in post-colonial Bengal, this Nomoshudro movement basically died down. Now, why that movement died down? It died down simply because of the fact that the Nomoshudros they were mostly concentrated in the eastern part of undivided colonial Bengal, or that we nowadays we call Bangladesh. So they were mainly concentrated in 6 to 7 districts of what we nowadays call Bangladesh. And therefore, what happened was, after partition, this community started migrating to West Bengal, and their migration happened in waves. If we, for example, look back and look at the genealogy of partition, we'll find that the upper caste migrated immediately after partition, and by 1945, the upper caste migration was more or less complete. But Nomoshudros did not initially migrate. the Nomoshudras did not initially migrate simply because of the fact that Nomoshudras were basically cultivators. Okay, they were dependent on manual labor. They did not have the social and cultural capital which the upper caste had. So therefore, they were not in a position to cope up with the immediate effects of dislocation. So therefore, they kind of choose to stay in East Pakistan. And afterwards, when religious violence and religious tension increased, then they started to migrate. So the Nomoshudra migration happened in waves. Okay, some of them came in 1950s, some of them came in 1960s. A large section of the Nomoshudras came in 1971 because of the Bangladesh war. And this migration is still happening. Okay, so what happened is that the Nomoshudras got dispersed. They got dispersed and the organized Nomoshudra movement lost momentum. Okay, because there was a geographical dislocation. And Nomoshudras who came in 1950s, many of the Nomoshudras were basically dispatched to different refugee camps in Dondokaronno. So if you are aware of the fact that Nomoshudra refugees who came in 1950s and 1960s, they were not resettled in West Bengal. A large part of the Nomoshudra communities were sent in Andaman, and a large part of the community was sent in Dondokaronno. So therefore, the community lost its geographical cohesiveness. The community got dispersed across India, and that, as a result, the organized Nomoshudra movement, which we see in colonial Bengal, that Nomoshudra movement basically died down in post-colonial Bengal. So Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's works basically addresses this Nomoshudra migration or Nomoshudra question, and he shows how, because of partition, Nomoshudra movement, from being a very vibrant movement which challenged the hegemony of the upper caste, this movement gradually petered out. So that's what Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's book talks about. But what my works does is that my work is not only concentrated on the Nomoshudra movement, it looks at the caste question as a whole. So what I have done in my book is that I have looked at various structural factors which are responsible for the insignificance of caste in West Bengal politics. Okay, so structural factors means, first of all, I have looked at demographic structure. That what are the demographic factors which are responsible for the kind of insignificance of caste in the formal political domain. Okay. Then I have looked at political economy. So what are the factors concerning political economy which are responsible for caste not playing an important role? Then I have looked at political culture. So that what are those particular aspects of political culture which create a situation which is not favorable for caste-based mobilization. Okay. And then I have also looked at caste mobilization, which is recently happening. That means I have looked at how caste mobilization is driven by the politics, the recent politics. Okay, how the refugee question and caste question becomes kind of interacting with each other in the current political discourse. So these are the broad factors I have looked at: political mobilization, and also I have looked at the question of political representation. That what is the situation of political representation of the lower caste in West Bengal. So these are the structural factors which I have looked at, and I have tried to understand that what are the factors that is spanning across multiple domains, spanning across the domains of political economy, political culture, political mobilization, political representation, which create a situation which is not favorable for caste-based mobilization. So that is the kind of you can say that is a departure from the earlier works, and so that's all. I think that's a background of the book.
Thank you, sir. We largely pinpointed on the various facets of the book,
Yeah.
on the structural factors and how you address caste. Now, my next question brings me, how do you realize or how do you explain the changes in the caste system? So to put it more simply, the book charts the intellectual developments in the understanding of caste system, where since independence there has been a transformation from interdependence between castes to competition amongst them. Can you elaborate upon that and whether such an analysis is sufficiently applicable in the case of West Bengal?
So I think that's a very complex question. Okay, so I hope the audience can relate to this question because it's quite theoretical and complex. So, so let me first rephrase the question so that everyone can understand it. So this question is about how you look at caste. How can we look at caste? Okay. So now there is a kind of consensus in the existing scholarship on caste that caste system is on a steady decline, that caste system is declining. Okay. Now, why this is the case? Because the ritual basis of caste has weakened. Ritual basis means, I'm trying to say the religious basis of caste has weakened. That means untouchability as a phenomenon, as a social phenomenon, is no longer as prominent as it used to be. Okay? I am not saying that untouchability doesn't exist. It exists. But there are now some legal restrictions on the practice of untouchability. So untouchability no longer remains as pervasive as it used to be. So because of that kind of you can say that because of the dying down of untouchability, you can say the caste system is on decline. So that's one argument which scholars make, and there is now a kind of consensus on that caste system is on decline. Okay, but the question is, if the caste system is on decline, whether caste identity is on decline. Because if we look at politics, we will see that there are political parties which appeal to caste identities, and caste matters in the electoral calculation. So if caste matters in the electoral arithmetic, and if there are political parties which are established to appeal to certain caste identities, then how can we say that caste identity is on a decline? So this is a paradoxical situation. The paradox lies in the fact that caste as a system has declined, but caste as an identity hasn't declined. Okay? Now, when we are saying that caste as a system has declined, how do we visualize caste? Okay? So, now, I can see caste as a system in two ways. Okay? So this is not I who have kind of understood caste in this way, but this is basically the most famous scholar on caste whom everyone has to read him, someone has to read caste, is Louis Dumont. So Louis Dumont's work on caste is extremely important, and he is the kind of starting point for any study on caste. So if we kind of see Louis Dumont's work, for example, then we will be able to understand this paradox, that caste system is declining, but caste identity is not declining. Okay. Now, if we can look at caste system in two ways. One, we can see caste system as a system of elements, and we can also see caste system as a system of relations. What is the difference? Okay, so I hope I am not becoming too theoretical, but this is how I think this question needs to be addressed, because the question is itself very complex. So, if we look at caste system as a system of relations, therefore we'll say that caste system exists or will exist till the time different elements within the caste system will be in an interdependent relations with each other. So caste system as a relations means caste system is a system where there are different units, and those units are in interdependent relations with each other. So that is the idea of caste system as a system of relations. Now, if I look at caste system as a system of elements, then caste system will be a system where there are different elements, different units, but they are not in an interdependent relationship. Okay. So, but the general tendency or the predominant tendency is to see caste as a system of relations, that there is a system in which there are different units called caste, and all of those units are related to each other. They are interdependent. Okay. So this we call the structuralist model of the caste system, that caste is a structure with units which are dependent on each other. And then there is a substantialist model of caste system. Now, substantialist model means that in caste system there will be units who can compete with each other. They are not interdependent. They can compete with each other. And caste is not a system of hierarchy. It's not a system of power differentials. It's not a system of social and economic hierarchy and social and economic power, but caste is basically a culture. Okay. So for example, now endogamy. Endogamy means the practice of marrying within caste. Now, if you go to North India, in some parts of North India, possibly in Haryana, in Uttar Pradesh, now their endogamy is how endogamy is kind of justified. It is justified by saying that that khana pina or rehen sahen of different castes are different. Okay, so since khana pina and rehen sahen, this is a word which one of the scholars Chris Fuller has done his field work, and he has kind of said this, that different caste groups argue that we do not marry with each other because our khan pin, our food habit, and rahen sahen, our lifestyles are different. Okay, so that means they are kind of elements, or they are units, caste are units who have different cultures. Our food are different, our lifestyle is different, our way of life are different. So caste is not only kind of a system where there is hierarchy between different castes, but caste becomes a system where different caste functions like different cultural communities. Okay, so these are the two ways of looking at caste. One is the way of, one is a vertical way. If I see caste system as vertically, that means one caste is up, one caste is down. So there is hierarchy. The caste which is above the another caste has more respect, more social power, more economic power. So this is one way of looking at caste. And then if I look at caste as a cultural community, then it is a horizontal classification. It's not hierarchical. Different castes are on the same platform, only their cultures are different. Okay, so this is, I think, very complex kind of question, very extremely complex, but I hope I made some sense. So broadly, if I need to summarize again, there are two models. One is a structural model where we see caste as a system of hierarchy. And hierarchy means some caste is up, some caste is down, and there is a dependence between each caste. And then there is another model of substantial caste system, which means that different units in the caste system, they are culturally different, they are cultural communities. There is no hierarchy between them, they are on the same platform. Their cultures are different, they do not intermarry, not because there is a kind of power difference, social respect difference. They do not intermarry because they are different in cultural sense. So these are the two ways of looking at caste. Okay. Now in the first model, now coming back to West Bengal, for example, in the first model, where there is hierarchy, or there is interdependence, there cannot be competition between castes. Castes cannot compete with each other as political communities. But if there is no hierarchy, or there is no interdependence between castes, one caste is not dependent on the other, so therefore they can compete in the political realm. Okay. So if caste as a politics emerges, caste as a system declines. Because if politics emerges, then caste will compete with each other. Okay, if caste politics emerges, caste will compete with each other. Okay, they will not be dependent on each other. But if caste remain dependent on each other, there cannot be political competition. So if Dalits are dependent on the upper caste for their livelihood, then they cannot compete with the upper caste in the political realm. But if they have been able to free themselves from some dependence of the upper caste, then they will be able to challenge the upper caste and compete with them in the political realm. So this is a paradoxical scenario where caste system declines, but caste politics rises. Yeah. Yeah. So my book is basically on post-colonial Bengal. My book is on post-colonial Bengal, caste in post-colonial Bengal. So I haven't looked at the colonial situation. apart from the fact that there are some dimensions of colonial Bengal which you need to look at before you jump to post-colonial Bengal. So those dimensions of colonial Bengal which are necessary for the analysis to take place. So I've looked at those dimensions of colonial Bengal. But talking about methods of analysis and kind of tracing the continuity and the change. So continuity and change, the word which you see in the title, continuity and change, this is because of the second research question which I talked about, that whether the decline of the left marks a major break as far as the role of caste in institutional politics is concerned. So is there a continuity between the left and the post-left? And if there is no continuity, then what change has happened between the kind of left and the post-left? So that question the book addresses, that's why you find this in the title. And coming to the method, there is kind of, the method is eclectic, so different chapters have used different methods. For example, I have looked at the Namashudra mobilization in the chapter on political mobilization. So in the chapter on political mobilization, I have looked at how far caste has become the central principle of organized mobilization of communities in West Bengal in the post-left era. So in order to look that, I have kind of done ethnographic research. That means I have gone to the field, done a field research on the Namashudros, and then I have also looked at the documents of, because I have mostly focused on BJP's mobilization pattern of the Namashudros. So I have also looked at how BJP addresses this question by looking at some of their documents, some of the documents of BJP and the RSS and all of those documents. So you can say that's a discourse analysis. So I have done discourse analysis. I have done ethnographic study in order to understand caste, how caste operates in the grassroots level. And then I have looked at political representation, which I told you. So for political representation, I have looked at the election. I have done a detailed study of the election commission data. So that's an empirical analysis of the election commission data, that whether representation of the lower caste has increased or not. Because if you are saying that caste is going to play an important role, then it must have manifested, some signs of that manifestation must be in the data concerning political representation. So for that, I have looked at election commission data. Then I have looked at kind of political culture, which is an extremely nebulous, intangible factor, and is very difficult to analyze political culture. So that I have done from an historical lens. So in order to understand political culture, I have looked at the recent political history as well as some part of the colonial Bengal's history to find how the political culture of the state has evolved over the years. So that's more of an historical study. So each chapter has employed a different textual strategy in order to understand this caste question. So I would say it's an eclectic method. There is no one single method which has been used. Different chapters have used different methods depending on what is the question at hand. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Because during the left era and all through the days of left movement, it also appears that class-based politics was given more stress, while the caste-based politics was not looked into. And it was out of fashion to talk about caste-based politics. And now with the decline of left, that was already there. And we can see, at least my observation is, that there was not much change that the left could bring in that making it horizon instead of vertical. That was somewhat hidden, and now with that decline, probably it is again surfacing. I'd like to have your views on that.
Yeah. So actually that is a central question the book addresses, that whether there has been a continuity or whether there has been a change. So I am more kind of inclined towards the point of view that there has been a great deal of continuity. Okay, so now if I have to understand whether the role of caste is increasing or not, how do I understand that? As a researcher, first I have to decide that how do I understand this question? What are the factors I look into for understanding this. So one factor is political representation. Okay. Because if we look at North India, even in South India, we see the rise of caste politics from the late 1970s more specifically. And what do we see? We see that from the late 1970s, the representation of the lower castes in North India, the other backward caste, the Mandal movement, the other backward caste, and the representation of the Dalits are increasing, and the representation of the upper caste are diminishing. So therefore, we can say that one manifestation of caste politics is the rising political representation of the lower caste. Yeah, so that's the exactly. Now the question is that's the question actually. So what I'm saying basically is that one indicator of the rise of caste is the rising political representation of the lower caste, as we have seen in other parts of the country. Now, if we look at West Bengal before 2011 and after 2011, so if you compare the data of elections before 2011, elections after 2011, and if we look at whether the number of candidates from lower caste has increased, they haven't increased. Even they have marginally declined. Okay. So whether political parties are giving greater representation to the lower caste, they are not giving greater representation to the lower caste. They are not giving. And 95 to 90% of the scheduled caste in West Bengal are elected from the reserve constituencies. Okay. Even you will be surprised to know in some of the elections, I have kind of analyzed this in detail in my book. In some of the elections, there was not even one lower caste or not even one scheduled caste who was given ticket from an unreserved constituency. Yeah, and same for Muslim. Muslim representation has remained low, but in scheduled caste at least you have reserved seat, so you have to provide some representation because of the reserved law. So because you have to abide by the law. So the point is that if you look at political representation, it hasn't increased. So all of this anticipation, all of this talk about the rise of caste doesn't have any empirical basis because political representation hasn't increased. So if political representation is not increasing, then how can we say that lower caste or politics of lower caste mobilization is playing an important role, unless there is some tangible effect on the organized domain of politics, which hasn't happened. So that is one way of looking at the caste question. So I would say that there is a great deal of continuity. And if we look at also the politics of the left and the politics after left, in terms of the discourse, in terms of the modus operandi, there is also a great deal of continuity. Okay. So one way of understanding West Bengal politics is a very common way of understanding West Bengal politics is Daipan Bhattacharya's characterization of West Bengal society as party society, where party plays a very prominent role and kind of party penetrates the everyday life in such a way that all other competing channels of public forums like caste groups, like religious bodies, like traders bodies, sports club, it could be local schools. Now they are all subordinate to the overarching authority of the party. So that was something which happened during the left, and I don't think that has changed. So the predominant role of party as a social institution in rural life remains intact. So long as the dominance of the party as a social institution remains, other social institutions like caste, like religion, will play a subordinate role. They won't be able to play an autonomous role which is free from the control of the party. So that is something which is unique in West Bengal, where party becomes more important than community. But for example, if you look at North Indian politics, where communities sometimes kind of force the party to take decisions in their favor, or community is as important and sometimes more important than the party. So religion is a bit different. Religion is a bit different because the kind of caste and religion as a social organization are different. So they are kind of internal makeup of a caste body and internal makeup of a religious body are different. In case of a religious body, you have some rules which coming from the scriptures. So I think it's a different kind of, we cannot club them together. We cannot club the caste politics and religious politics together. They have to be analytically made separate and discussed accordingly. Yeah.
We are incredibly glad that so many questions are coming to our beloved Quest.
I hope it's not becoming extremely complex. Yeah.
But we will have a question and answer sessions at the end of the talk itself. So we students can come in at that point. But even if now anybody has any pertinent question,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's an excellent question, actually. And I take that criticism first. That what I meant to say was that when you talk about political mobilization, the current political mobilization, then caste and religion has to be kind of some analytical separation is needed between caste as a mode of mobilization and religion as a mode of mobilization. So that was basically what I wanted to argue. What we say is absolutely kind of makes perfect sense to me. That see, there are two traditions broadly. Broadly, there are two traditions of Dalit movement. If we look at Dalit movement broadly, one Dalit movement, which is the kind of mainstream Dalit movement, or which is the more dominant trend within the Dalit movement, is the reformist Dalit movement, and the other is a radical Dalit movement. So what is the difference between reformist and radical Dalit movement? Okay. So the radical Dalit movement, which is kind of represented by Ambedkar, and there are other advocates also, but Ambedkar remains the most famous advocate of the radical trend within the Dalit movement. So radical Dalit movement is radical because it is autonomous. Autonomous from whom? Autonomous from Hinduism. Okay. So it basically asserts its independence and autonomy from Hinduism, and it intends to adopt a different non-Hindu identity. Okay. So that movement we see in southern part of India and western part of India. For example, we see Periyar's movement or Phule's movement. So what is their basic argument of Periyar's and Phule? So their basic argument is that basically Brahmins are the descendants of the Aryans, and the Aryans came from basically they accept the Aryan invasion theory, that Aryans came from outside and they subjugated the original inhabitants of this land, and Brahmins are the descendants of Brahmins and the upper caste are the descendants of the Aryans, and the lower caste are the descendants of the original inhabitants of the land. Okay. So what basically this narrative does? This narrative basically adopts a alternative identity, which we call the Dravidian identity. So that's a racial ethnic identity. So that is an alternative identity to the Hindu caste identity. So this is a radical Dalit movement which does not see itself as a part of Hindu broader tradition of Hinduism. It kind of adopts a non-Hindu identity, which in case of the Dravidian movement is a ethnic and racial identity. And in case of Ambedkarite movement, it is a Buddhist identity. Okay, so this is the radical kind of understanding of the Dalit movement, and there is another understanding which is the more kind of dominant reformist understanding, that it says that okay, there are kind of problems like untouchability, there are problems like caste hierarchy. So we can solve this problem not by leaving Hinduism, but by being within the Hindu fold. So that is a more mainstream and dominant movement. And if you look at Namashudra movement and Motua movement, that is a reformist movement. Okay. Yeah, that's mostly a part of the tradition of the reformist movement. That's a Hindu caste movement. Okay. So this is basically the two ways of looking at caste. So I think that is something which basically.
Right. It is true that many of the arguments in the book have somewhere or the other gone out in different directions. But to bring the discussion again back to the question of the book itself, my next question would be that within the public discourse, the terms Motua and Namashudra, and in your book you have largely brought up the Namashudra movement while discussing about the effect of caste politics in our state. So Motua and Namashudra are often used interchangeably. Considering your book largely refers to the intricacies of the Namashudra movement, what are your comments on the political correctness of such perceived synonymity?
Okay. So now these two terms, Matua and Namashudros, have been used interchangeably in my book, and in most of the writings which you find, they are used interchangeably. Now the question is why Motu and Namashudros, both the term are used interchangeably? Are they synonymous terms that we use them interchangeably? The reason for using these two terms in a way, in a synonymous manner, is because we do not have data. That's the crude way of putting it. Because who are Motuas? Motua is basically a sect, and Namashudra is basically a caste. So any person can become a Motua. A Brahman can also become a Motua. So to become Motua, you have to believe in the philosophy of the Motua. You have to become member of the Motua Mahasangha. Anyone can become a Motua Mahasangha. Yeah. So exactly. So our chief minister is also basically has become member of Motua Mahasangha. So everyone can become a Motua if you believe in that philosophy, right? Yes. So that's basically a sect, Motua. And Namashudras are basically a caste. So, but if we look at the writings, my writings, anyone's writing, you will see that these two terms are used interchangeably, because most of the Namashudros are Motuas and most of the Motuas are Namashudros. Okay. Now the question is, how many Namashudros are Motuas, and what are the other communities, a number of people outside the Namashudra who are Motuas? We do not simply have any data. Okay, so there is no data available. So since there is no data available, it's difficult to separate them when you are making an analytical point, or when you are making an analytical kind of endeavor. So it becomes difficult. So that's the reason. But of course, if we can know the number, then it will be easier for us to make a distinction between both these identities, because they are not to a large extent they coincide, but they are not completely similar also.
Yes, sir. So basic difference lies in that Motuas are basically part of the Namashudra community who are following the particular sect of the Motua Mahasangha. So in this book you have also discussed that the BJP's growing political presence in West Bengal has initiated a change in the Namashudra community's communal self-perception, leading to heightened religious consciousness. Can we hear more about this?
Okay, so I have looked at how BJP is mobilizing the Namashudra community and how it is different from the previous patterns of Namashudra mobilization. So that is something which I have looked at. Now, as I already mentioned, that Namashudra is basically a caste. Okay. So how do I mobilize the Namashudras? But if you look at BJP is not mobilizing the Namashudros or the Motuas as a caste group. What they are basically doing is that they are mobilizing them as Hindu refugees. Okay. So now, as we know that Namashudros and the Motuas, they, as I already highlighted, they were mostly concentrated in the eastern part of the undivided colonial Bengal, and they migrated first from East Pakistan and then from Bangladesh, and the primary reason for their migration is of course because of communal tension, because of religious persecution and all. So the Namashudra Motua community has migrated because of communal tension and religious persecution and all. So they are also refugees and Hindu refugees. So when BJP is mobilizing them, they are not mobilizing the Namashudros as a caste group. They are mobilizing them as a Hindu refugee group. Okay. So what this has done, that this has kind of rekindled the Nomoshudros' memory of religious victimization, which I, in my book, has called the politics of memory. Okay, so this has led to politicization of the memory of religious victimization, and this has also brought back in the public discourse the important event of partition. Now, if we look at the existing literature on Nomoshudro movement, for example, Shekhar Bantopadhyay's study, more specifically, now partition has been seen as an event. That partition is an event, and because of partition, the Nomoshudros has become a dispersed community, and therefore Nomoshudro movement has declined. So partition is basically seen as a event. But partition, what I have tried to kind of explore, that partition is not only an event, but partition is also a psychological memory. Okay? And since the Nomoshudros are victims of religious persecution, so they can also be mobilized as Hindu refugees, and currently they are mobilized by the BJP not as a caste group but as a Hindu refugee group, and this has kind of revitalized their memory of persecution, and partition has become a very important event in the political narrative of the state. Okay, and I think you can also understand it by just looking at what kind of discussions are taking place right now. Okay, so we are kind of discussing partition more and more, I think. I do not know, but that is what I feel, that we are discussing partition more and more in the present politics of the state. And this discussion is coming in the context of how Motuas got displaced from Bangladesh and how we can look at partition. And there are many blogs which are coming up. For example, there are very famous blogs like Banglar Vite is a blog which has become, a blog is a kind of, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So, because of the Citizenship Amendment Act and the discussion around the Citizenship Amendment Act, now we are looking at partition from a different lens now. So, partition has become a key political, what can I say? Partition has become a key now a key political event in the current political discourse. Okay. So partition is not only an event, but it is also a psychological memory, and that memory can be used for political mobilization. And if that happens, then what happens is that the person who is being mobilized, for example, the Matuas are being mobilized. So Matuas, the question is whether a Matua will see himself or herself as a lower caste person or as a Hindu refugee. So that is the question, put in very simple term, that is the question that a Matua will face. Yeah.
I think Motuas are that much scared that in NRC we need to then be thrown out.
Because of CAA.
Yeah, because of CAA. It is rather the Rajbangshis who are apprehensive of the fact that the CAA will lead to the incoming of more migrants who will occupy their lands. And that is something also addressed in the book.
So I think, yeah.
The question of Rajbangshis, and they are more apprehensive that CAA will lead to the incoming of more migrants occupying their land.
Exactly. Actually, there is a difference between the demands of the Rajbangshi and the Motuas. Okay, so Motuas want the CAA and they do not want the NRC, but the Rajbangshis want the NRC, they do not want the CAA. Okay, now these are the two major Dalit communities, and if they cannot agree on this fundamental thing, then there cannot be a, what can I say, there cannot be Dalit politics in West Bengal. Yeah.
And the question of communal self-perception and the changes within it actually is incredibly important, and that brings me to the next question as well. That on this same issue, I believe we have come across Rajat Rai's thesis that in a recent article he has argued that the elections
Yeah.
It is actually their sinking into consciousness, whereas Rajendra is saying that it is strategic.
Yeah, so it's kind of, it's looking at the same issue from two different perspectives. So, so my point is, I would say my point is that it starts as a strategic move. So why the Matuas started supporting the BJP? They started supporting the BJP because it will benefit them through the CAA. So because of the CAA, they moved towards the BJP. So it's the move was strategic move in the initial phase. It started as a strategic move. But CAA is not only a legislative measure. It's not only a legislative initiative. There is an entire discourse. There is an entire narrative which has been weaved around the CAA. That narrative has partition in it. Okay, that narrative has Hindu victimization in it. Now, when you are being subjected to such a narrative, sometimes what is strategic and what is ideological becomes obfuscated. Okay, so it may start as a strategic move, but it may end up being something which is kind of have some impact on your political consciousness also. Yeah. Exactly, there is a both present of it. It started as a strategic move, but if we say that it will remain a strategic move, because I would disagree, because I do not think that human beings can be construed as completely rationalistic and strategic actors. There is a great deal of emotional element to a human being also. Yeah.
So, on the question of emotions, and one of the things, apart from that as well, that we point in the domain of culture that absence of a Dalit counter-public has also prevented the political mobilization.
Okay.
So, what do you exactly mean by the presence of a Dalit counter-public?
Okay, so Dalit counter-public is a familiar idea or familiar concept which has been used in order to understand Dalit movement, particularly in the context of North India. And the book that you might want to look at is Badri Narayan's work, The Rise of a Dalit Counter-Public in North India. So what is counter-public? The idea of counter-public comes from basically Nancy Fraser and Rita Felsky. These two are basically talks about counter-public. So counter-public is basically a counter-culture. It is a counter-discourse which is formed by the subordinate social groups. And this counter-discourse or counter-culture enables them to form an oppositional idea about their own identities and interests, which is different from the dominant value system. So it basically a counter-discourse, counter-culture, which opposes the dominant value system, or in very simple sense, the upper caste hegemonic value system. Okay, so that is, yeah, if you.
So, we discussed about a lot of things. We discussed about partition, we discussed about culture. So, for a moment, let us discuss about the future. So, this brings me to my final question. That is, as per your rigorous research, what are the politics of the growth of Ambedkarite politics in West Bengal, in your opinion?
Okay, so this question is, I think, is related to the previous question which you posed to me, that Dalit counter-public. So if Ambedkarite politics has to take birth, then a Dalit counter-public, it will take birth in the form of a Dalit counter-public only, because that will be a kind of challenge to the dominant value system. Now, as I have argued in my book, that there is a deep penetration of Bhadralok value system into the lower caste consciousness. Okay, so through field research, I have found that there is a deep penetration of the dominant Bhadralok value system in the lower caste consciousness. So unless this dominance of the Bhadralok value system is countered by a counter discourse, it is difficult for an Ambedkarite politics to germinate. Okay, now I think we are almost reaching the end of the discussion, so I will very briefly highlight what does it mean. Now, for example, Dalit literature. Now, I hope some of you might have some idea about Dalit literature. Now, what is Dalit literature? So, Dalit literature basically is a challenge to the dominant upper caste hegemonic value system. So, that is Dalit literature. Now, if we look at the genealogy of Dalit literature, it started in 1970s in Maharashtra, and thereafter it also spread to other parts of the country in northern India, in southern India. In West Bengal, Dalit literature as a movement started quite late, 20 years after it started in other parts of the country. Okay, so it first started in 1987 when an organization of Dalit Lekhak Porishad was formed. In 1992, I think Chaturtha Dunia as a magazine was formed. So that was the beginning of Dalit literature in West Bengal. Now, how many Dalits in West Bengal are aware of Dalit literature? Okay, so now, okay, so A.E. Rood, who is a very famous scholar, now in his book Poetics of Village Politics, which is based on ethnographic field research in I think Bardhaman in West Bengal. So here he says that mainstream writings by writers like Tagore, Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay, Tarashankar Bandyopadhyay, Sharat Chandra Chatterjee, writings of these people are very popular. He particularly says that Polli Samaj, Sharat Chandra Chatterjee's Polli Samaj is a very popular text and many have read it in the rural society. Okay, Gano Devota, Tarashankar Bandyopadhyay, many have read it. So these are very popular texts. So, and when I have also done my research, in field research, I have seen that if you ask a Dalit, an educated Dalit person, modern educated Dalit, he has read Tagore, he has read some of the literature of Tagore, he has read some literature of Bibhutibhushan, Tarashankar, Manik Bandyopadhyay, but he hasn't, very few have read Dalit literature. Okay. They are not even aware of Dalit literature. And talking about Ambedkar, Ambedkar is a very popular, known figure in northern India. But if you go to the villages of West Bengal and talk to people belonging to lower caste, how many are aware of what is the contribution of Ambedkar? They might have heard the name, but Ambedkar as a symbol of Dalit pride, a symbol of Dalit glory, and a symbol of Dalit resistance, I think that is quite absent. And that's quite palpable also. Yeah.
Most parts of India, people are to some extent aware of what kind of politics has been represented by America.
Yeah.
So that is unfortunate, but again, I think that brings us to the close of the book discussion. And we will open the session to the question answer session to the students itself. So if any of the students have any questions, will you please raise their hands? Yeah. Please start.
Yeah. Okay, so Sanskritization is a concept as you must all be knowing. It's a concept given by M.N. Srinivas. It basically talks about, or it basically refers to the tendency of the lower caste to emulate the behavior, the way of life, the customs of the higher caste. Okay, so this is something Sanskritization. If you look at Namashudra movement, you will find that there has been a great deal of absorption of the higher caste value system, which we can call Sanskritization. Okay, so see what I just talked about, that there are two kinds of Dalit movement: reformist movement and radical movements. Those movements which are reformist in nature, okay, those movements which kind of reform kind of the Hindu culture by removing untouchability, by removing caste hierarchy, by removing caste discrimination, those movements are generally adopt the strategy of Sanskritization. Okay, so when a caste group Sanskritizes itself, what happens? It leads to a positional change. So, for example, Namashudros, if Namashudros Sanskritizes their rituals, their behavior, that means they are demanding higher position within the caste hierarchy. But they are not saying that there should be structural change of the entire system. So what is happening is a positional change of a caste group from one kind of slot of the hierarchy to the another slot, a higher slot. So this is a positional change, this is not a structural change. But the radical caste movement, they talk about structural change. So any caste movement which is reformist is generally adopts the path of Sanskritization, because the caste group then tries to adopt the kind of higher caste value system. But if a caste group is adopting the radical caste movement, then it challenges the entire structure of caste. Okay? It doesn't want to move up in the hierarchy, it wants to abolish the caste system. So that is basically, so it depends on what kind of movement you are looking at. If you look at Nomoshudra movement, Motua movement, in Motua movement is a reformist movement, more or less. So therefore, a great deal of Sanskritization has taken place over the years in Motua movement, because Matuas have adopted the lifestyle, the values of the upper caste, and that process is still undergoing. Okay, so it hasn't stopped; it is still going on. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
Yeah. I take one by one. Okay, so otherwise I tend to forget what the last question was. So, what is the future of the refugee movement in West Bengal? Now, do we see any refugee movement right now? So that is the question. Because Motua movement is a refugee movement. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how the Matuas analyze them. Okay. So refugee movement happened in West Bengal in 1950s and 1960s. Okay. Thereafter, the refugee movement, generally kind of, refugee question did not had much of a bearing on the formal politics of the state. Now the refugee question has again come to limelight because of the Nomoshudra Matua question. Okay. But can refugee movement be reduced to the Matua movement, or should it be a separate movement? That is another important issue, because if you reduce refugee movement to Motua movement, then those people who are not Motua but they are refugees, how their problems will be solved? Okay, so for example, in as per some estimates, in 1971, after the Bangladesh Liberation War, 1 crore people migrated from, as per some estimates, 1 crore people migrated from Bangladesh to India, and most of them are Hindus. Now there cannot be 1 crore Nomoshudros. So there must be many other communities who are also within that 1 crore bracket. Now what has happened because of the Nomoshudra Motua movement, the entire refugee discourse has been appropriated by the Motua Nomoshudra movement. And those refugees who are not Nomoshudros, no one is talking about them. And we do not even know whether they exist, what are their demands, is there any movement? Okay, so this I think is a problematic area, because there is now a tendency to reduce Matua movement to a refugee movement and making them synonymous political phenomena. If we make them synonymous political phenomena, the struggle, the demands of those who are not Nomoshudros but they are refugees are going to be ignored. So that is the question I think the kind of politics of the state has to address in coming decades. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mhm.
mobilization. My question would be, not only is there a future of Ambedkarite politics in West Bengal, but my question would be, is there a relevance for Ambedkarite politics in West Bengal? Do we need to read, reread, and perhaps creatively interpret the politics of Ambedkar himself to perhaps find the relevance for him in present times? Is he relevant at all?
Yeah, so what has happened is that Ambedkar has become a key reference point whenever you talk about Dalit issues. And this is also to an extent problematic because then also we reduce the whole Dalit discourse to Ambedkar. That there is only one figure who fought for the Dalits and there were no other personalities who also contributed to the struggle of the Dalits. So that is, I think, an area which some people have started to work upon. So that's the idea of looking Dalit politics from a non-Ambedkarite perspective. Okay, so it's not only about Ambedkar, there are other figures also who are also quite prominent. For example, Babu Jagjiban Ram. So if we look at colonial India, the most popular Dalit leader possibly was not Ambedkar. It was Babu Jagjiban, tradition of caste reform movement. There was another very influential figure of Dalit politics in South India, which M.C. Raja. So M.C. Raja is also a very prominent Dalit figure of colonial India. There are many other figures. For example, Jogendranath Mondal, if we talk about West Bengal. Okay, so there are others people also. Even if we, P.R. Thakur, Pramotharanjan Thakur also played a very significant role in West Bengal politics, in Bengal politics, not West Bengal politics, in Bengal politics in the 1940s, when Bengal was moving towards partition. Okay, and for example, Mukut Bihari Mollik. So there are many figures who played quite a prominent role in West Bengal politics as representative of the Dalits in the 1940s. And if we look at the larger context of Indian politics also, apart from, of course, we talk about Phule, we talk about Periyar. So whenever we talk about Dalit politics, we talk about Phule and Periyar. Okay, but there are many other figures. For example, Swami Achyutanand. Now, Swami Achyutanand is a very important figure of Dalit movement in the 1920s. In the Adi movement, which happened, the Adi Hindu movement, which happened in Uttar Pradesh. Manguram. Now, Manguram was another important figure of Adi kind of Dharam movement in Punjab in the 1920s. Okay, so there are many other figures, and I think we need to kind of give all of these important figures of Dalit assertion, if not as much importance as Ambedkar, but some amount of importance I think is needed to be given to those figures. And I think that process has started because Jogendranath Mandal book came out by Daipan Sen it's a biography of Jogendranath Mandal, it came out for Cambridge University Press. So mainstream literature is being produced on people who are not. So that's kind of, I completely agree with you that if you look at Dalit politics, we must see it holistically and moving away from a focus on a particular one or two people, we should look at it from a holistic, comprehensive and more inclusive perspective, I would say. Yeah.
My answer to your question would be, I do not think there is a necessary clash between Ambedkar and the other major proponents of Dalit rights. That if you look at the Ambedkarite movement, how it is getting shaped in India, if you just look at the posters itself, there is a picture of Ambedkar. I think
I think the problem does not lie with Ambedkar, but the problem lies with the scholars, I guess. Okay, so they need to be more inclusive, and they need to look beyond the traditional way of understanding the Dalit politics. And hopefully that process has started, and I hope that that process will culminate into something very productive.